Good evening, I'm Joel Flynn in Hong Kong. Welcome to View TV News. Coming up on tonight's show. An 11-year-old girl drowns at Butterfly Beach. A mixed outcome for ex-Hong Kong University Student Union head Billy Fung in court for leading protests on campus. And Hong Kong's deputy police chief defends the force, saying it's in no way a political tool. We start, though, this evening with the tragic news that an 11-year-old girl has drowned whilst swimming at Butterfly Beach in Tuen Mun. The girl was unconscious after she was pulled out of the water by divers just a matter of hours ago. Her family, who were on the beach with her, had reported her missing at around 6 p.m. After searching for an hour, divers had found her under the water. She was pronounced dead at hospital after being in a coma. Former president of the Hong Kong University Students' Union, Billy Fung, has been convicted of disorderly conduct but acquitted of criminal intimidation after leading protests on campus last year. Fung earlier pleaded guilty to criminal damage and forcible entry into an HKU council meeting on the Sassoon Road campus. Another ex-student union member, Coleman Lee, has also been convicted. They've now been released on bail until sentencing in September after the judge heard their pleas for leniency. Clashes erupted when students tried to block the council members from leaving the building. They were unhappy with the appointment of Arthur Lee as council chairman and had hoped to overhaul the school's governing structure. The government could be keeping the existing formula for calculating workers' severance and long service payments. That's despite the former chief executive's plan to adjust them. By law, employers need to pay workers a long service or severance fee equivalent to the number of working years multiplied by 2/3 of the employee's monthly income, or a maximum of $390,000. In announcing the scrapping of the MPF offsetting mechanism, CY Leung had proposed to lower the percentage to half the monthly income. But Chief Executive Matthew Cheung said today he is looking into keeping the original calculations but lower the maximum amount to make it more affordable for companies. Hong Kong's first female deputy police chief, Winnie Chiu, has rejected criticism over the force's professionalism, saying it is in no way a political tool. Speaking to reporters for the first time since her promotion earlier this month, the 54-year-old says there's a good morale at the police force and that the officers are determined to serve citizens. Having joined the male-dominated occupation 34 years ago, Chiu says she cares greatly about how officers conduct themselves and that those who break the law will be swiftly dealt with.
Our society is becoming more complicated, but our job has not changed at all. Our mission is about maintaining law and order and safeguarding life and property. It has been like this since I joined the force 30 years ago.
Veteran US Senator John McCain has a brain tumor and is reviewing treatment options, according to his office. Treatment for the 80-year-old may include a combination of chemotherapy and radiation. The tumour was discovered during surgery to remove a blood clot from above his eye. McCain's doctors say he is in good spirits and is recovering well. There's been an outpouring of support for the sixth-term senator. Former President Barack Obama, who McCain ran against in the 2008 presidential race, said cancer doesn't know what it's up against. Well, staying in the US, don't go on holiday quite yet. That's what US President Donald Trump has told his fellow Republican senators after their attempts to replace Obamacare collapsed. Trump's pushing his fellow Republicans to work harder and find common ground in their bid to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, which was a major promise of Trump's 2016 presidential campaign. It comes as the Congressional Budget Office reports that 32 million Americans could be out of health insurance under the Republicans' latest healthcare plan. It is the second time the right-dominated Senate has failed to reach an agreement. 4 Republicans have turned their backs on the current bill.
We can repeal, but we should repeal and replace, and we shouldn't leave town until this is complete, until this bill is on my desk, And until we all go over to the Oval Office, I'll sign it and we can celebrate for the American people.
Well, meanwhile, Trump admits he wouldn't have appointed Jeff Sessions as Attorney General if he'd known that Sessions would recuse himself from the Russia investigation. Speaking to the New York Times, Trump said Sessions should never have recused himself from the probe. The ex-Attorney General recused himself in March from the investigation into alleged Russia meddling in the 2016 U.S. presidential election and possible ties between Russian officials and the Trump campaign. Meanwhile, Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and former campaign manager as well, have been asked to testify before the Senate committees conducting the investigation on July 26th. The trio are the closest associates of the president to be called to face lawmakers about the probe. OK, coming up next, the latest from the world of business. OK, we kick off by taking a quick look at what's been happening on the markets here in Hong Kong today. The remarkable run of consecutive gains for the stock index continued for its 9th day in a row. The Hang Seng Index of leading shares closing up at 26,740 points, an increase of 0.25% on the day. Industrial companies doing well overall, while energy companies also benefiting from a bounce in oil prices. The Bank of Japan, meanwhile, has decided to maintain its expansionary monetary policy as it pushed back further its ambitious inflation target. Analysts say the move has underscored concerns that its massive stimulus program will stay in place long after other major central banks have scaled theirs back. Well, earlier I spoke to our Japanese correspondent Maya Yoshida and asked her why, despite the rosy numbers, the Bank of Japan's monetary policy would continue to worry investors.
That's right, Joel. Well, for example, earlier on Thursday, we saw positive export data that showed moderate economic recovery in Japan. But despite some rosy numbers, there is still no sign the inflation rate is rising. In fact, it's still near zero, even after 4 years since the BOJ launched its huge asset buying program. Now, when you take a look back, last year, the BOJ made a bold move to introduce negative interest rates. But investors, shareholders, and analysts gave a thumbs down as negative rates did little to spur credit demand and actually pressured Japanese lenders. But now that the BOJ for the 6th time delayed the deadline again to hit the 2% inflation target, it looks like the central bank became a little bit more realistic. Joel.
Well, one of the big worries for markets and businesses is further strains on Sino-US relations. Washington and Beijing have failed to agree on concrete steps towards reducing the huge trade deficit the US has with China, raising yet more questions about the future direction of the relationship. Dan Epstein sent us this update from Beijing.
Well, the press conference was cancelled and no joint statement was released, which has led many to assume that there was some type of breakdown in the talks, or at least that no meaningful consensus was reached on any of the important topics, which for the USA, of course, is addressing the trade deficit, which stands at about $350 billion. And one of the main ways that we're hoping to do that is to lobby China for greater access to China's market. Now, in the build-up to these talks, China did allow American beef and liquefied natural gas into China, but many in America were hoping that this was just a precursor for more substantive liberalizing of China's market. Now, this hasn't happened, and another approach that is rumored to maybe happen is that America will impose tariffs of its own, in particular on cheap Chinese steel. And when asked after the talks, President Trump said that it could happen. Now, from China's perspective, it's coming up to the 19th Party Congress at the end of the year. And it could be very strategic to look tough on the USA, to be seen to not cave to American interests. It could be more beneficial, more strategic than any sort of trade liberalization at this stage.
Well, meanwhile, Donald Trump has suggested that tariffs could be imposed on steel imports in a move thought to be aimed at China. Trump has long railed against Chinese imports of steel, although it only currently makes up around 3% of the market.
From day one, my administration has been fighting to bring back our manufacturing jobs and to crack down on foreign countries that cheat. Get a lot of them. We will end the theft of American prosperity, and we will stand up for our companies, our factories, and our workers. Is that okay with you, Michael? Good?
Well, US bank Morgan Stanley yesterday beat analyst expectations to post profit gains across its businesses, up 11% overall in the second quarter. The lender will be happy not just about such big numbers, though, but also that it managed to claim yet another trading victory over its rival Goldman Sachs. Rochelle Chen has more.
Morgan Stanley beat Wall Street's profit expectations and reported gains across most of its businesses. One dark spot, bond trading, fell 4%. That's still much less than at other banks, such as Goldman Sachs, which chalked up a 40% drop. Good earnings gave a boost to Morgan Stanley's stock. Through Tuesday's close, it's risen about 7% this year, outpacing the KBW Bank Index. Olivia Aran covers the story for Reuters.
Morgan Stanley actually has a different fixed income footprint than some of the banks. In 2015, at the end of the year, they had dismal performance and they cut 25% of their trading staff and really reduced the amount of assets that they dedicate to trading. So less capital-intensive business, fewer people, and it's paid off really well. They changed their leadership, and they've still been able to, for the last 2 quarters, produce results exceeding that of Goldman, which has more people and more products, bigger footprint.
After the financial crisis, Morgan Stanley's chief executive officer, James Gorman, shifted the bank's focus to wealth management. It's much more predictable business than trading, and it now brings about 50% of Morgan Stanley's revenue.
Well, UK banks, meanwhile, won't be celebrating quite as much. New rules from January could hit their bottom lines, although they'll be saving British consumers hundreds of millions of pounds. The UK's Finance Ministry has scrapped charges on card transactions, fees that had been labelled as rip-offs by many in the country. It has been a common practice for just about every retailer that rakes in almost £500 million every year. Now, those using American Express, PayPal and Apple Pay will no longer have to pay extra to use those services, as well as those using Visa and MasterCard. While it's